minimizing charisma, maximizing intelligence, shooting someone in the crotch with a cannonball, thrust, propulsion. It's science-y.
Why you always gotta be blowing my spot up like that? There are my runes. There they are. I'm not mad. Science needs art and art needs science. They both need each other to function properly.
There are ways to figure out what the paper is really saying.
And then I'm ready to get on Twitter and yell at people about doing their own research on...
Oh, hold on there, sports fan.
Kyle Hill, everybody! He's the next generation of science communicator. I'm going to be too old at a certain point to do those terrible things to my body, and it'll be up to you.
He's got like a lion's mane. This guy's amazing. Kyle Hill.
I'm Boo Rambo.
The universe is indifferent to you. Whether or not you have amazing hair, the universe doesn't care.
How are trees pushing past this pressure limit? Behold, my balls. Now we're getting somewhere, but I still don't think it's...
Chat, welcome. Happy to have everyone here for a special edition of Office Hours. We're doing a little something different today. We are doing a live interview with two policy experts from the Planetary Society. Happy to have all my newbies, all my oldbies here. Like I said, this will be a little bit different in that we will be conducting this live interview with our two experts, so I will not be as attentive to the initial questions. I want to pick their brains about what we're talking about today, and of course, what we're talking about today is the future of NASA. You may have heard, at least in the United States, about some dire cuts to science in general, some cuts to NASA in specific, and we're here to talk about what that means for the future of science in space, space exploration. Should we do a manned mission to Mars? Should we pivot on some of the other missions and sciencey things that we're doing? That's what we're talking about today. So, like I said, we'll be taking questions after we talk to our two experts today. What is next in the Half-Life History series? I don't know. Probably something, rad. But if you have questions, save them until after the interview. And if there's anything particularly spicy or that you particularly want to know, we will try to get to it. And I'm sensitive to my experts' time, so why don't we just get right into it? Chat, welcome. Let's bring in... Whoop. It's time to bungulate, Mr. Hill. I have some overflow from the burnt peanut. That's fine. Here we go. Chat, please welcome Casey and Jack. Very excited to have both of them here. Want to make sure... We'll make sure that everybody can hear everything. Good evening from Sweden. Hello, hello. Yes, we'll be talking with Casey and Jack, who work with and at the Planetary Society, a storied society, first founded, I think, in 1980 right. by the one and only Carl Sagan and some colleagues of his. But today, they do much work in the science and space. So before we get into it, I just wanted to say also this is part of a partnership that we're doing via Basilisk. I'm doing scientific education and outreach coordination for the esports team that we're affiliated with, and part of that partnership is we're working with the Planetary Society, so I'm happy to have them here. Hello, Casey and Jack. Nice to see you.
Hey, Kyle.
Thanks for being here.
Hey,
Thanks
Kyle.
for talking with me. Chat, when Casey and Jack speak, can you hear them? Just want to make sure. Give me a quick yay or nay. There's a slight delay on the... Yes. Okay, great. So, Casey and Jack, maybe starting with you, Casey, could you give us a little bit of an intro for who you are and what you do?
Yeah, I'm the Chief of Space Policy for the Planetary Society. So what that means is that I try to help develop the ideas that we want to see projected into our national space program. So where should we go for scientific exploration? What should we do when we get there? And how do we do that and bring everyone with us as we do it? It is, the process of, I always think about it, it's the zero-width law of going into space. You have to get the politics in order first. How does the little neurons and little chemicals, passing between our synapses ultimately lead to this cascade of outcomes to building a spacecraft out of metal and launching it to some destination? That's the idea of policy at the end of the day, is convincing enough people using your words to, commit these huge amounts of exciting resources to do something really unprecedented. So policy and trying to influence that's what I do for the Planetary Society.
Amazing. I like the way that you put that. It's kind of, I like the all-encompassing nature of going from neurotransmitters to something that launches into space is kind of amazing.
It's pretty weird when you think about it, right? Just like a couple of little dopamine things move across someone's synapse. It's like, all right, I'll fire that off in someone else's brain, and cascade.
Yeah.
And you get Europa mission.
And Jack, could you give us a little intro, please?
Yep, happy to. So my name's Jack Corelli. I'm the Director of Government Relations for the Planetary Society. So I'm the, we'll say, man on the ground here in Washington, D.C., where I'm based. And so I'm the one trying to get those synapses to be firing for a very particular audience of 535 members of the United States Congress. Right. And so working with our partners in commercial and academic spaces and trying to help craft the coalitions that help make those synapses happen, and get the policy to come together. And so kind of in the bridge between that policy realm, the public, and that sort of the grassroots movements for space exploration and science, and the policymakers themselves.
Okay. Well, thank you. Let's get right into it. I titled this stream something a little dire. Is this the end of NASA as we know it? You see a lot of similar headlines right now. Things seem pretty grim. I think that was actually the title of our first emails between each other. It's like, oh, this is pretty grim. So kind of give us and the listeners here the lay of the land. What has happened to the state of science and space funding here in the United States?
Yeah, so, big picture, right, is that NASA's part of the executive branch, so the White House and the occupants at the White House, get to set a lot of policy in terms of how and where and what NASA does. Obviously, Congress then kind of weighs in, provides the money to do it. And usually, NASA's, particularly for the last, since the end of Apollo, has had a pretty broad set of consensus. It's puttered along at around $25 billion a year or so. It's not nothing, but a lot smaller than Apollo was. And we do some amazing things with this. And a lot of us have grown up with that NASA. In the last 5 months, there have been a series of proposals and changes already beginning to happen at the space agency from White House direction that could create, as you accurately titled, kind of a radically different space program than the one that we grew up with and the one we're kind of used to as a country and world. And fundamentally, big picture, top lines, they're talking about lopping off a quarter of NASA's budget in 1 year. Just historically speaking, that is the largest proposed cut to NASA ever in its history. That's not distributed evenly. Of that cut, they would cut half of NASA's funding for all of its science activities. These are missions to Europa. These are the rovers on Mars. These are the Earth observation and climate monitoring systems. These are missions that monitor, asteroids that could hit us. Everything that basically NASA collects data in space for that is not with a human on it is NASA science stuff. And, that's a radical proposal, losing half of your income in 1 year, basically, to do this. And as a consequence, you'd basically be turning off missions that are in space right now, turning data, like literally turning them off and just letting them tumble into blackness. You're ending the pipeline of new missions. We're canceling hosts of contributions and partnerships with other nations, like in Europe. And broadly, more than that, they're going to lay off, roughly a third of NASA's workforce, giving it the smallest workforce since 1960 and the smallest budget ultimately since 1961. So these are years, some of you may know, as before the first human went into space. So it's a very radically different agency if this all happens.
So Oh, I mean, I guess I didn't even internalize the fact that if we have active missions in space, you're saying literally they just
Yeah,
continue off on a straight line forever, and that's it.
yeah. This isn't a figurative speech. They literally right now we're actually just got direction to start planning closeout activities for New Horizons, which is flew by Pluto. It's now in the Kuiper Belt. Juno, which is around Jupiter right now, collecting great data.
So that
Osiris
the
Apex.
spacecrafts that brought us those amazing images of Pluto for the first time
Yeah.
will just, like you said, just become one with the void somewhere.
Yeah, it's just such a waste. It's an insane thing to do.
And
Jack,
the billion-dollar
yeah, please.
investment that we've made as taxpayers of my money, of your money,
Yeah.
that went to these projects would just, tumble out into blackness.
Wow. Yeah, I guess I didn't really, like I said, really come to terms emotionally with that. Jack, from your perspective on the ground in D.C., what is the political impetus for something like this? Is it really just hack and slash, trying to quote unquote balance the budget, or is there a more ideological reason?
It definitely falls more in the ideological area, though. The talking points, the very little bit of defense that this budget proposal, and remember, this is a proposal, this is not enacted. This is just what the administration is claiming is their set of policy priorities. And Congress ultimately holds the purse strings. Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution imbues Congress and Congress alone with appropriating funds from the U.S. Treasury. This proposal, the very little defense that the administration has given towards it has been, oh, well, we need to balance the budget. Cuts need to be made everywhere. This is 0.37% of all federal spending. There are 287 other NASA's worth of expenditure that happen in the United States government. And NASA has actually remained relatively flat in real dollars, which means in inflation adjusted dollars, and the purchasing power that we have today is actually taken close to a $2 billion hit just in the last 5 years. So we've already been balancing the budget on NASA's back the past half decade. And now it's, these further cuts fall more in line with the ideological push of ultimately one person. And it's not anybody that anybody elected. It's the Office of Management and Budget Director, Russ Vought, who back in 2022 wrote a treatise basically saying, I want to cut 50% of NASA's science budget, with not really much of a rationale other than to say he doesn't, I think, functionally really believe that that's an activity that the US government should pursue. Meanwhile, this is an activity, space exploration broadly, that is a 3-to-1 economic return on investment for the US government. $75 billion created
when you
in
say
just 1 year.
Okay, so when you say 3-to-1 return on investment, what do you mean practically speaking? I think some people can look at, NASA's always, at least in my lifetime, it seems like NASA's always been kind of underfunded. But when you say, why spend money on space in general, why not focus some of that money or those efforts here? Talk a little bit about what actually gets generated from exploring space in the way that we're doing it now.
Absolutely. I mean, so, you got a $1 billion spacecraft. You don't put $1 billion $1 bills into a space capsule and launch that into space. All billion of those dollars are spent here to boost our local economies all across the country and involving other parts of the world as well. And so for every dollar that NASA spends in the US economy, which remember, 85% of NASA's expenditures go through the agency and out to industry. So it's not even like that even just stays within the civil servant workforce, right? That is going out to industry and commercial partners, academic institutions, and helping create what is the space economy. About 300,000 jobs are supported writ large in the space economy, all thanks to that measly $24 billion investment that we have for NASA. And so for every $1 we spend, there's $3 back in economic output in both direct investment, indirect benefits, and sort of those induced benefits, developing of technologies that we otherwise would never have come up with or invented. I mean, the reason why we have, holding up my phone, reason why we have those great cameras on our smartphones these days is because we flew by Pluto. We had to develop those technologies. The reason why many of the creature comforts we have today are available to us. It's because of those foundational investments we made in technology development in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, up through today. And it continues to make life better here on Earth. And so all of that investment is benefiting everyone, whether you work for the agency or a contracting firm or work in commercial space sector, or indirectly, or through these induced processes, and you're just a beneficiary as a consumer of electronics.
I think that's a really important point to make that you said, when we're investing not just in a spacecraft that costs a lot of money. It is putting money into local economies and national laboratories and your international partners and things like that. I think that's something critical that I've found in doing a lot of nuclear related communication, where yes, a power plant takes a long time to build, but you're also paying local communities and trade members and union members a lot of, you're offering a lot of high paying jobs in those local communities to do that big thing. So it isn't just throwing money at, a school bus sized rover or something like that. It is investing in everything that goes into producing that product. Casey, so you spoke a little bit about this, but what specific programs and missions are going to be affected by these proposals?
So it's primarily, again, it's all of our robotics-based probes. So these are missions ranging from Mercury out to and beyond Pluto. It's all of our Earth observation satellites. It's all of our deep space telescopes, right? So it's catastrophic for astronomy. It kills off roughly 2/3 of all space telescopes that aren't, it's not the Hubble or James Webb, but all the other ones, in X-ray and infrared and other wavelengths. And it also really decimates the scientific community. The people who would collect this data, we need scientists to study it. We need to hire and train students, to help out and become the next generation of scientists. And it impacts those as well. It even hits down infrastructure. You just mentioned nuclear a little bit. Plutonium-238, which is a radioisotope, is used to power deep spacecraft. The missions beyond Pluto, how do they still work? Because they have a little chunk of a hot rock, plutonium-238, that's giving off heat that they turn into electrical power. You have to make that. Someone has to make that. And NASA has actually spent the last 20 years rebuilding the capability with the Department of Energy to specifically create this rare, and obviously it decays, you continuously have to make more of it, capability. And without that, you can't go beyond Jupiter. You can't go to really dusty plains of Mars for long periods of time. You can't survive. There's
also something that you're leaving out geopolitically there, where it's, if we aren't able to make that plutonium, then we have to get it from somewhere if we need it, and that somewhere currently is Russia.
Who will not sell it to us right now. They're not too happy with us. Or China, frankly. China's building up its own capability as well.
Yeah, which makes it an even more fraught environment for doing what you want to do.
And they just canceled this program in this budget, so they wind that down.
Okay. Yeah, I'm tumbling in the void with everything that you're saying, because I guess when you say, basically, we're blinding ourselves to the universe a little bit, poking our own eyes out. What does that mean for, you said 2/3 of the telescopes that are looking into the sky?
Again, they're
when you say that just ends, what do you mean by end? I imagine if the budget was cut, okay, no more funding goes to that program, but what does that mean, like, actionably? Are people who usually walk in the door every day and control it, they just turn off the monitors? Not too far from that. It's a relationship between, there's the space telescopes. Again, those are the ones that they'll shut down and just let them tumble off into space. Ground-based observatories will be shut down, condemned, abandoned. Literally, we're not just literally.
It's actually the most dispassionate way we can think of to describe this.
Like those big observation domes and things that people regularly associate with astronomy and space science, they will just be buildings.
Yeah. The Keck Space Institute, which runs the Keck telescopes, is planning its shutdown procedure right now at the direction of the White House.
That's crazy.
It is.
to not at least find a way to utilize at least all this infrastructure, all this technology for something else, or to pivot it or something, to just abandon it seems absolutely crazy. And speaking of pivoting, I know there's also an idea to pivot some of what we want to do in space to maybe, put humans on Mars for the first time. I imagine that is probably more of a, someone wants it as a political win to be, the first people or person or administration to put someone on Mars. But Jack, could you talk a little bit about why that may or may not make sense?
Yeah, well, it's important to note that NASA has been working towards the goal, maybe in the form of different named programs, has been working towards sending humans to Mars for more than a decade. It has been the ultimate goal to send humans back to the moon and onward to Mars. I think dating back to the 2005 NASA authorization. It's something that has always been on our radar. And as someone who loves Mars exploration, not just the robots, but the concept of eventually sending humans, I would love to see a program that is well thought out and that builds on the infrastructure that we've invested in, that keeps up those investments and brings people along with it and develops the workforce and thinks through all of these big problems. How do we land larger and larger payloads on the surface? How do we send things back safely? How do we solve the radiation problem? Yeah. When you're in not in an environment like in low Earth orbit where you're protected by the magnetosphere, Mars is a very unforgiving place. How are we going to deal with the risks posed by the dust, the regolith that's on the surface of Mars? It would be great if we had a plan for that. NASA's been working towards that. The problem is this budget proposal just throws all that out the window and says none of that exercise was worth anything. We're just gonna do it, and somehow it's going to be cheaper and more efficient and take less time than what we had been planning.
It literally says something. I mean, not literally says it. It says something will go to Mars, but it literally will say, we will figure out what the program is and we will brief Congress when appropriate. So they're throwing some money at sending humans to Mars, but they didn't even think it through.
Step one, we want to go to Mars. Step two, ?
Yeah.
Step three,
exactly.
Profit.
It's the underpants gnomes approach to Mars.
Yeah. And it's really concerning because as you might expect, Congress, the 535 members whose job it is to oversee the activities of the U.S. government and appropriate those funds, do not like seeing, we'll just figure it out, give us $1 billion. Yeah. They expect a level of transparency and accountability, of engaging stakeholders, of working with commercial partners, finding those novel solutions. This is all going to cost money, right? Going into space costs money. We get a lot out of it. We get the sublime the sense of discovery, the emotional benefit. We get the cultural benefit. We get the geopolitical benefits and the economic benefits. But it all costs money, right? All of that costs money, and that money has to be accountable. But when you submit a budget request to Congress and you say, just give us $1 billion just in the next year on a Mars program, we have not defined the requirements or specifications or procurement policies or practices for, just trust us, we'll do it. That doesn't fly very well on Capitol Hill.
Destroying science.
While also, undoing science, and specifically some of the Mars programs that have helped us better understand the Martian environment. Missions like Maven and Odyssey, which are currently in orbit, which are slated for cancellation in this budget request, and Mars sample return. We have been studying, scientists and engineers within the U.S. government and within industry have been studying Mars sample return as a concept, lowercase s, lowercase r, not this specific program that we're talking about, but the concept of going to Mars, grabbing, curated rock samples and bringing them back. We've been studying that since 1970, and we're just going to say, you know what, it's not worth our time to try to do that now before we send humans. Let's just send humans, and somehow that's going to be cheaper and more efficient and quicker than if we spent the time to figure out how to do it robotically, and just not solving for any of those other problems, right? The radiation problem, the dust problem, entry, descent, and landing.
Or
like
the going insane for
it's
3 years in space problem.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Those are
It's
not.
it's incoherent at best. The
Yeah,
strategy.
and yeah, it seems like, I mean, the general argument for manned missions versus robotic missions has always been that trying to find the cost benefit of, well, a robot can do it, will do any science or retrieval recovery much slower than a human with hands could, but getting a human to a place like Mars could be much more expensive. You were mentioning, you know, the payloads and actually getting to Mars in the first place. I don't know if people remember, but we had to test all these different technologies to figure out how to slow ourselves down in a very wispy atmosphere on a planet that has almost no atmosphere. We can do this on Earth because we have a substantial one, but in the Martian environment, you don't have the same deceleration capabilities, right? And if you take everything, you know, the 7 minutes of terror, you take all of that, and now you are landing people with families, and a payload is going to be, what, 10x or 100x or whatever it is. That problem compounds dramatically.
Right.
And if we, it seems like we're shooting ourselves in both feet, where you're cutting some of the programs that want to solve those problems while at the same time approaching a modality that might not be the most efficient. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you never
Yeah,
want,
it's- I
you
mean, I
never
think
want
that's a
you never
reasonable,
want
like-
experts to be completely silent when you say, like,
It's
oh,
it's
yeah.
well, it's like,
I feel
where
like
do we
every
pick up
disaster
from
movie
this?
begins that way.
Yeah.
Well, before we get to gloom and doom, and chat, if you're in, I see you. I've been looking at you the whole time. Many of you have good questions. We'll get to those in just a moment. Trust me. You know what? Spam an emoji right now if you want to, so I can see you. We'll get to you in a second. But before we get to gloom and doom, are there things that we can do? Casey, let's start with you. What can we do, or who can we support, or what can we do as citizens and with organizations like the Planetary Society?
Yeah. So yes, there are things we can do, and that's good and appreciate it. It's easy to be doom and gloom and that this is inevitable. It's not. And as Jack said, Congress does have a role to play and could fix this here if they wanted to. The politics obviously are pretty weird right now, but there is, you know, we already actually saw on the Republican side, they fixed their big canceled human spaceflight projects like the Space Launch System and Gateway Space Station and parts of Artemis that were canceled in this proposal. They fixed that through this other process. So things are, you know, no one was excited about this budget, not even in their own party. And there is lots of room to fix the science side. So, you know, this is why we've been engaging with our members of Congress. And if you live in the United States, planetary.org has ways that you can write, make phone calls, learn our talking points, see data. I have tons of data. I love data. And, you know, we have charts and all these other things that you can see and educate yourself with. And it's really about that engagement, because if they don't hear about this, this won't just be a major issue, right? We have to really push and push and push and push, because there's a lot going on right now. It's very, very possible to change this still. This is not the final word, but it is serious. Like, that's at the same time. This is a serious situation. It's probably the most serious situation facing NASA in its history. Wow. But it's not inevitable. And so it is very possible.
I mean, you were talking about the cultural impact of having these programs, and I was looking at my own arm, and I reminded myself that my first tattoo was the pale blue dot image, and then the sentence from Carl says, like, it makes a huge difference in people's lives to have, you know, our eyes still looking up when we can have it.
There's something I just want to build on there. That's something that's so important, because that's, you know, we talk about funding and economics, and that's all true, and technology development and inspiration. It's like, but at the end of the day, are we a culture that is like going to look up and out? Mm-hmm. And what cultures that look down and in and like hunch over themselves and just stare at the dirt are going to be really fun cultures to live in? Are they interesting? Are they seeking out new ideas? Are they going to have this like semantic internal collapse into nothingness or absurdity because we're just not looking for things. If you really want to validate, like, for example, is a scientific theory universal? You have to go out into the universe to test it, right? You have to keep going and pushing boundaries. If you just give up and sit on the proverbial couch as a culture, you will not have a good time. And so this is the equivalent of that.
Yeah, I think just yesterday there was another observation in space. I can't remember if it was another gravitational lensing experiment or something, but another reconfirmation of general relativity and special relativity. It's like, guys, I think Einstein was right on this one. I don't know if we need to keep doing anyway. But Jack, from your perspective in DC, what are some other things? What kinds of attention can we bring to this? Who can we talk to? Where are the pressure points?
Yeah, I mean, Congress is where it's at right now. So you have two chambers, right? You have the House of Representatives representing the 435 congressional districts, all of relatively equal size, all across the country. And then you have the Senate, two members from each state. So everyone's got one rep and two senators. Writing them right now is incredibly important because, as Casey said, if you're not making that case to them and reminding them that this is an issue, they have a lot of opportunity. This is not the way that policy is crafted. It certainly is confusing, and maybe the confusion's kind of the point sometimes. But there's a lot of different places in which members of Congress themselves can relay the concerns of their constituents, even if, say, that member of Congress doesn't sit on a committee, doesn't have much of a NASA equity in their district or state. But it might be something of personal, emotional interest. It might be something of, I know some members, are just really big fans of science fiction and want to see the humanities, surpass ourselves in our understanding of the cosmos and to continue to explore. Some of them, the economic angle really matters. Some of them, it's the national security and national prestige, the race, multiple, I think, space races that are happening right now between the U.S. and its adversaries. Obviously, we're working very closely with some countries, but China in particular has laid out a very ambitious roadmap, not just for returning humans to the moon, but for returning samples from Mars and finding life elsewhere in the solar system and potentially beyond, and has laid out a very specific roadmap of how they're going to do it, modeled, oddly enough, on some of our own programs, but they're putting their money, where their mouth is. And making our voice heard in this conversation, for whatever reason, our representative, whether you voted for him or not, you're still their constituent, and they're there to represent you, and they want to do a good job doing that. That's how they get reelected all the time, right? They want to be seen as someone who's responsive to the request of their constituencies. Now, planetary.org, we have a ton of resources, opportunities to engage, writing letters, making those phone calls, especially if you're a constituent, make a huge impact. For something like space, it can define how that office thinks about the issue. A member's office might receive 10, 15, 20,000 messages a day during a very peak period of, maybe political tension. But yours might be the only one pertaining to space, right? And they have staff that go through those messages, that craft responses, that ingest that information, kind of balance it with what they're hearing from advocacy organizations, stakeholder groups, and lobbyists, and the other actors in this play that we're all in. And so having your voice be part of the conversation, I'm reminded an old mentor of mine used to say, if you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And
I like
that drives my passion for advocacy and community engagement, because all of us have an opportunity. Democracy is not a spectator sport. And it doesn't just happen on that first cold Tuesday in November. It happens every single day. And so if you're able to write or call, or better yet, visit, whether it's in the district office or come here to DC, that makes a huge impact and helps define how that office, your representatives, may think about that issue. And you might be surprised. They might then reach out to you in the future, do the inverse, and reach out to you in the future about what you might think about a particular topic, knowing that you're interested in this, in space, science, and exploration. And so it can help create that relationship between the elected official and the constituent. And so getting involved is that first step. In planetary.org, we have an action hub that has a number of updates, talking points, resources, data, and those advocacy opportunities that are coming up.
Democracy is not a spectator sport.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, we'll make sure to get this pinned, get planetary.org pinned in the comments and the discussion and description is what I meant to say. I'm looking as you were speaking. I'm looking at the chat now. Hey, chat, and some people were talking about private space companies.
Yes. Let's talk.
So, I get the sense that some people don't feel that the situation is as dire as it may be because you have an organization like a SpaceX or something like that. Is the privatization of space of any consequence for what we're talking about today? Is this a way to save some of the things that we might lose?
Yeah, there's a role for them. But I mean, here's an easy way to sum it up. The Commercial Space Federation, that's the industry group that represents these commercial space companies, has come out against this budget proposal too, specifically the cuts to science, right? Because it's their customers. Basic science, sending a mission to Europa is not a commercial project. No one is going to pay for that. There's no commercial media. This is like why we have a public space agency, right? It's why we do public scientific investigations, because it's a foundational value that is not immediately commercializable. It doesn't fit into quarterly earnings reports. SpaceX is great. SpaceX builds great rockets. And they build some communication. They build lots of communication satellites. What SpaceX doesn't do is pay for their own science missions. They don't send missions. They don't build their own spacecraft to Europa. They don't spend their own Earth observing satellites. No one does. In fact, this is one of the unique things that NASA does is these science missions. Ironically, SpaceX does want to send humans to Mars, and so NASA is trying to double down and repeating what the private sector says it will already do. Right, so it's kind of the inverse of the normal kind of philosophy of the current governing administration. This is, if we stop doing science, as NASA stops doing NASA science stuff, no one's going to fill that void. There's no private option for them.
Right. We wouldn't want. I mean, I'm thinking of a analogy as you're speaking. Something else for the public good that doesn't make a lot of money is research into new antibiotics or new vaccines. And we wouldn't want everyone to stop researching and producing, antibiotics for the new strains of antibiotic-resistant bacteria. So you need some of these large government national labs continuing to do this basic fundamental science that benefits the public as a whole, even though it's not making a bunch of money. So it sounds like, as you're saying, that there is place at the table, as you said, Jack, for private space companies, but it's if you are cutting off at the knees all of the basic science funding, then there's no replacement for that currently.
Yeah, I was talking with a space economist the other day on my podcast, and we both kind of were joking, but kind of half seriously. Every private space company, no matter its ambitions, kind of ultimately becomes just a customer for the Defense Department, right? It's because that's where the money is, and that's where they're going to. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, government money ultimately funds the vast majority of private space activities still. And so we need, if nothing else, I mean, we can use private space to launch space science missions. We can use them to design components. We can help reduce costs, but they're just not going to pay for it themselves out of the goodness of their heart, right? We went through this discussion. After World War II, there was a big report by Vannevar Bush, president of MIT, to President Roosevelt at the time that said, the United States needs to invest in science as a public policy for the good of the nation, because we just barely won this war because of our advances in technology, in radar, in nuclear, in antibiotics. And without that, we will not succeed our nation will not be safe. This is why we do this. We went through this lesson, and we are actively unlearning it right now, with space science being an example of that.
Yeah, I think, no matter what side of the political aisle you're on, I feel like you can find something that is going to be important to you. Again, thinking back on kind of like my nuclear side of things, if it's not jobs, if it's not fundamental science, if it's not, powering, remote areas, like you said, it could be national security. If you don't feel like, like a long-haired hippie like me who just wants more nuclear power, maybe you want, if we don't do X, Y, and Z things, then Russia's going to do it, and China's going to do it, or any other nation who is adversarial to national interest will do it. And that is a concern that becomes all the more apparent when you start hacking things away.
You can think of it like, why does Mercedes participate in F1, Formula F1? It's like they're not selling those cars. It's a way for them to keep their engineers motivated, top-notch, and challenging, tackling the most challenging, insane engineering problems, because it then benefits the rest of the company. It all filters down. NASA's the like F1 equivalent of the US government in terms of that's why you have it filters out to all these other things, with national security being a major aspect of it. And if it's a draw, right? It's like it pulls out like a magnet over iron filings, like the best and brightest minds. And even if they don't stay in space, they just had a chance to work on the most challenging, unforgiving, technically difficult capabilities. I feel like half of Google's software team that keeps their infrastructure up and running came from writing NASA robotic missions that could not fail, right, on Mars, right? So you have to, if you find yourself and challenge yourself to do really, really difficult things, and space is great at giving you really impossible things to try to do, that all filters back in any number of ways.
Okay, so I think that's a great analogy. It's almost like you do this for a living. So we have about 10 minutes left or so. Chat, I would like to go to you, and there'll be a slight delay before chat starts asking questions. But chat, if you have any questions for our policy experts here, Casey and Jack, let us know, and we'll try to get to it. We will make sure to get everyone. Get planetary.org in front of everyone after this is live. And of course, if you want to join the conversation after we're live, the VOD will be live on the main channel, and you can discuss with people there. Let's see. I love
they can give us the tough questions or whatever.
Yeah. Feel free to be spicy with it.
Throw it at us. We're ready.
What would be the best kind of language or tone to use in a letter to your congressperson?
That's a Jack question.
That's a good one. Like, is it okay to be super pissed off, or do you want to be,
You do want to be respectful. I think first and foremost, you want to assume
polite.
Polite. Yeah, it's. First off, I think there's a lot of folks that will disagree with their representative on any number of issues. I've certainly lived in districts where, I did not align on any number of issues, majority of issues with my elected representatives. But they, at the end of the day, are your elected officials, and they don't know whether you voted for them or not, right? And so, like, coming at it as if it's adversarial, as if you have to fight them to get them to believe you, it actually doesn't get you very far. And capitalizing on your own passion and enthusiasm. What does this mean to you? On what heartstrings does this pull? And start from there. And then also look at their committee membership, look at public statements that they've made. All of them have websites and social media where they post public statements. You might have to, go through some of the political stuff on top of a lot of it, especially in recent days. But look at some of their statements on NASA, on science and space exploration. You can search for those key terms on their websites and see how they might be talking about that. And another thing, if they're a member of a caucus, if they're a member of the Planetary Science Caucus, the only caucus in the U.S. Congress that's dedicated to advancing space science and exploration, that can give you a sense of how that member feels. And so you can connect your passion and enthusiasm, what motivates you to write that letter, and connect it with what they might care about. Maybe they're on the House Armed Services Committee. Maybe they served in uniform before. Maybe they've made a lot of statements about national security. And even if that's not necessarily your top priority, it's their top priority. And so merging those two topics of you're passionate about it for a reason, they should be passionate about for a similar reason. And being able to bridge those connections, and again, taking a polite but passionate tone can go a long way. And remember, also, it's likely going to be a staff member reading it. Right. You throw in a bunch of expletives or rude language, there's a pile for letters like that in a congressional office. You want to make sure that this is something that gets read. And so putting that personal touch on it is very important. That can help get it through those those filters that they have at that level,
Well, and
get it
just to
into
build
the
on that,
right hands.
I mean, Kyle, it's kind of, you can think of it like communicating science. Like it's a communications challenge. Like it's just a very specific audience.
Yeah.
So the better you know your audience, that's kind of what Jack is saying, right? The better you know that audience, the more effective you can be. Now, you don't have to do that. You can still fire off a quick message. It gets recorded. And I mean, I could even do a quick plug. We have online course called Space Advocacy 101 on our membership community, Planetary Society, that I put together a few years ago. That goes through a lot of what Jack said in detail. Like, here's how to look up this information, your member of Congress. Here's how to connect these dots. Here's how to reach out and kind of plan a strategy if you want to go that far. But don't let that stop you from even just firing off that first initial email. You can always write another one or make a phone call, right? So it's just, I think that firm, as Jack said, polite passion is always a good way to start.
I think that's a good way to put it. Polite passion. Casey, you were speaking earlier about, some of our current missions literally just tumbling off into the void. What contingencies, if any, do we have in place to preserve research or to transfer it to other agencies or something outside of NASA?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a difference. It's like, what are we talking about? Just the data that we have, or are we talking about the hardware themselves? Hardware becomes slightly difficult because there's legal issues about U.S. ownership. It has been, occasionally there has been a few examples of NASA transferring operations to a university of a space asset. It tends to, so it can happen. There have been consortiums that run a lot of ground-based, astronomy observatories. And so there are theoretically ways to consider how to hand some of these off. Notably, the administration is not considering any of them, right? I mean, that's kind of the tell here, right? They're not looking for ways to hand these off to continue operating them. They're looking to shut them down as quickly as possible. So they would have to be the ones to approve it and to manage it and allow it to happen. And again, we're not seeing that. So there could be creative solutions, but no creativity is currently being allowed.
I have a question for you, Kyle. Why the Colgate ad as we were watching this video? Because my Kevins have terrible teeth and I want a science-based solution. But for the other guests, could you just donate to NASA?
I think there is a way to technically add some extra tax money. I think it'd be better to donate to the Planetary Society to help us represent you better personally, but I guess I'm a little biased.
Well, you say that jokingly. What is the real force multiplier that donating to a place like TPS, in addition to just the advocacy resources? What else are you doing at an organization like yours that supporting you can enable? Period. Yeah.
So we also run a lot of some of the first crowdfunding science projects as our organization put together. We have a lot of ones that support planetary defense and search for extraterrestrial intelligence or life beyond Earth. We're also doing work for education and other outreach, trying to just build up this broad positive approach, like carry this Carl Sagan-esque and now Bill Nye-esque version of space. I'll just add, we are independent, right? So we don't represent the scientific community. We don't represent the aerospace industry community. We don't take government money. Right. And so we have nothing, all the advocacy too that we do, we don't get a piece of that if it works. We don't get a big fat government contract. We just get to see the same pictures you do at the end of the day. And that independence is literally just enabled by people deciding to give us some money to talk about this. And that gives us a lot of freedom right now to kind of say what we think and to say that this is really bad and not be worried about repercussions or having to worry about losing government contracts or any of that. We're one of the very few organizations that do that. So we have this independence that is enabled by this, and that broadly reflects in all of our various activities.
And
that opens a lot of doors for
Go
us. Just to add the Capitol Hill element, that opens a lot of doors for us because we're not going in there to advocate for a particular program because our stakeholders are going to benefit, our shareholders are going to benefit, or we're going in there with as close to an objective view as you can get in politics of the data, the analysis that we're doing. That independence buys us a lot of credibility. And so helping members of Congress understand the issues at play and potential solutions, getting them the information they need to make better decisions is part of what we do. And a lot of that, it cuts across our policy program, which you're looking at, it's the two of us, as well as communications and getting the information out to the people that need to see it so that they can then disseminate it and make the right decisions about the future of the program. And so, really excited about the work that we're able to do thanks to our amazing supporters that truly not only the ones that just donate, but that donate and then show up for our days of action and who write the letters.
We bring you to DC too. Like that's the other big thing that Jack and I really do every year. We bring more people to DC to talk about space than pretty much any other organization.
Amazing. Now, Chad, I'm going to be 100% honest with you here. We didn't do a full unlimited Zoom call time. So I'm not sure if it's just going to stop in like 60 seconds or not. But this has been an amazing conversation so far, and really humbling and sobering a little bit. I didn't know the extent of everything, and it's really important, I think, to know what we can do going forward, and if this is really, like you said, this isn't all set in stone just yet. There are things that we can do and people that we can talk to, just in case we drop out in 60 seconds or so. Is there any final thing that you'd like to say or point people towards other than planetary.org?
Well, just that there's the Action Hub, Save NASA Science on planetary.org. It has a lot of weekly updates. It has our resources, ways to contact Congress, get educated, follow along. That's the big thing. We have a newsletter and monthly policy podcast, and our Days of Action in Washington, D.C. At least once a year. We bring people together, and you can do it yourself. So the thing is, and I'll say one more thing, even if these do happen, and I hope they don't, but even if they do, we are not giving up on this, right? And none of us should give up. We should never take this as a final answer, right? Then the work will just be rebuilding the damn spacecraft and going back out there, because that's what we should do as a society, right? We shouldn't just give up and crawl into our little cave and plug our ears and close our eyes and just like hope everything is great and fancy, right? We have to keep pushing outwards and challenging ourselves and being open to this. That's exactly what you talk about, Kyle. It's like on the show, this is our motivator. This is what elevates us. This is what gives us this broader purpose and connection and awareness to the universe in which we reside. To give up on that is just insanity, and we're not ever going to give up on that.
Incredible. So I think we're still. I didn't get any notification from Google that we're stopping. But just so we can kind of button everything up, Jack, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, we're in the midst of the process, right? I think there's part of the confusion right now, and again, maybe part of the confusion is part of the problem, is Congress just passed what people have been referring to as the budget bill, the BBB, the budget reconciliation thing. Mm-hmm. That's not what we're talking about, and I do want to just kind of put that out there so that it's said. That's been a lot of the communication I've been doing, is that is a completely separate process than what we're talking about with the NASA budget, which is what you would call annual appropriations. I've been saying the lowercase b budget, this thing that happens every year, and that process is just starting. And so seeing this budget reconciliation, love it, hate it, whatever, it's passed, that's in the past, right? We are now going full bore into annual appropriations process. And so if you haven't gotten involved with our Save NASA Science campaign, now is the time to get involved, because we are ramping up our activities here in DC and around the country, around the world even. We had 21,000 people, most of them here in the United States, but folks from all around the world. Over 100 countries were represented in a petition that we submitted to the Congress, and that's just been our opening salvo. And so we have a number of activities, as Casey pointed out, that we're putting together that are all going to be available on that Save NASA Science Action Hub. But for the appropriations process, that's starting, literally it's starting this week, right? And so like Congress is now going to have their first say of the matter officially on the NASA budget. And so we're going to continue to pound the pavement and burn the shoe leather on Capitol Hill and around the country to make sure that we pull out all the stops. We're laying it all out on the field. I don't want to look back and have any regrets about what we do over the course of these next really 5-ish months that we have. Roughly, there's kind of a loose deadline in terms of the appropriations process. That's a whole other video we can talk about. But over these next 5 months, through the end of the year at the very least, we are going to lay it all out on the field and be prepared for, as Casey said, rebuilding if we have to, but damn it, we're going to get this done.
Incredible. Incredible. Chat, please join me in thanking our two guests, Casey and Jack. I think it goes without saying that they're incredibly well-spoken and know what they're talking about and passionate about what they're talking about. If you want to learn more, if you want to get involved, planetary.org. We will pin that at the in the comments and the description if you want to learn more. I think correct me if I'm wrong, since you're still here, I think it's one of the oldest, one of the largest independent space organizations in the world,
largest.
is it not?
Yeah, the largest,
Yep.
and maybe second. It can kind of National Space Society is a merging of two organizations, one older and one younger than the Planetary Society. So I'll let you debate the semantics of that one.
Well, regardless, it is a storied and very important organization. Thank you guys for coming on the show. There's more stuff, chat, that we'll be doing with the Planetary Society in the future, not just here on this channel, but also on the gaming channel, which is an interesting thing that we're going to try to spread the word with. But if you enjoyed conversations like this with experts like Casey and Jack, let me know in the comments, do all that sort of things. This is kind of the first live interview I think we've ever done for the podcast Office Hours thing. So if you like it, please let me know. And yeah, Casey and Jack, thank you so much for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will point as many people as we can towards your admirable mission. So thanks for being here.
Thank you, Kyle. I appreciate it. And what an honor to be your first guest on the Office Hour.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. You guys are amazing, and we'll work together soon, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kyle. Ad Astra to everyone.
Ad Astra. Thank you so much. See you, fellas. Chat. Chat. Join me, won't you? Chat, what did you think of that? Was that, let me know right now, was that interesting, informative? Was that something that you'd like to see me do more of, talking to experts live like that? I know the setup wasn't optimal. It was kind of, you get what you get from these online meeting services, but that was my first approximation of a cool approach to a little interview segment part of the show. Yes, it's fun. I thought you did this many times before. I don't think so. Director X, I wish I came in earlier. The full VOD of the full hour-long interview will be available on YouTube after the fact. Sorry, I wasn't looking at Twitch as much as I should have been. More, please. Informative and beautiful. Please do more. I desire more knowledge, please. Another thing I was trying to do, chat, this is an inherently political conversation. About funding and what gets funded in a country, talking to your representatives, all that sorts of thing. But I hope we did it in a objective, not dispassionate, but in a way that didn't seem like we were really interested in anything other than keeping space, travel, and science alive, at least in the United States. And so, and good job. Chat, you were very civil and very nice. No crazy spamming of crazy stuff. I appreciate that. The only problem were the commercial interruptions. I'll make sure to minimize those on the VOD. I'll delete a bunch of my Colgate ads. I don't choose when you see those. If you have a problem with that, first get the Colgate Total active prevention system. But then message John Colgate about it. I missed it. Gonna watch on YouTube. Yes, it will be available in just a few moments, chat. I watch a lot of interviews in this style, and I very much enjoy them all. Yeah, this is good. This was good. To work with and have people on as intelligent and well-spoken as Casey and Jack, I think you can immediately tell that they are very good advocates for space, and they are to be supported. They are to be supported. I gotta be honest, it's still kind of early for me, Jen. Who's the guy with the long hair on the right? I don't know. Some hippie. I don't know. Some hippie. But before we go, some updates, of course, chat. It's been a little while since our last live... No, it hasn't. If you want even more live streams, we had a even more spicy one last week talking about enrichment and nuclear weapons. If you want more science while we're live, you can also check out the gaming channel. Right now, I'm on a mission to find all the most radioactive locations in Fallout. I think we did like 51 science times during our stream on Sunday. You can go check that out. As well, coming up here at La Facilidad. Speaking of space, I think we have an episode coming out about space elevators and their engineering relatively soon. And then in terms, many of you were asking about the Half-Life Histories stuff. I think the next thing that's close to that isn't going to be a typical Half-Life history, but it will be a travel video. What's the gaming channel name? It's just my name, Kyle Hill Gaming. It will be a travel video, another Expedition Europe, as I'm calling it. I got the opportunity like 4 weeks ago to get a private tour of the Mokavce power plant, nuclear power plant in Slovakia. And I was able to go inside of a cooling tower, which almost nobody ever gets to do. So the next big nuclear episode on the Chan will be a travel video from Slovakia. I hope I'm going to try to explain everything you need to know about cooling towers, why they're shaped that way, how they work. We're going to talk about 3D printing. We're going to talk about pizza. We're going to talk about the Halo theme song. We're going to have footage inside of a cooling tower. It's going to be cool. That's going to be the next big thing on the channel, I think. But chat, I think this was a important conversation. I learned a lot. I did not know, when I titled this stream, the end of NASA. Mokavce? Yeah, it was Mokavce. Over on Twitch. Murgataw. Mokavce. I have been derailed. That's going to be the next big thing in terms of nuclear stuff. And then I'm working on, of course, more existential threats, more collaborations and partnerships. Oh, right. I actually learned a lot from this stream. I did not know exactly how dire the situation was. You hear about cuts to an organization like NASA and you think, well, that's probably bad for NASA. But I didn't know they're just going to be literally turning off spacecraft and just letting them tumble through space, never to be seen again. That's crazy. That's wild. Or just abandoning a giant observatory. I mean, that might be a cool location in Fallout, but in real life, that's just sad. I sucked up something through the straw. Any advice for someone going into a nuclear engineering major? Well, if you're already going into it, what I did to know thyself. So I knew that, in learning situations, I get distracted easily, and I like to emphasize things in my memory. So I wrote everything down, physicalizing the process of note-taking, not on a computer, not digitally. Physicalize the process of note-taking, taking thanks, Chrissy. Physicalize the process of note-taking. Go to classes early, not late in the day when, you're getting tired around 2 or 3 p.m. and you're not paying attention as much. And then I sat at in the front of every class. So at the very front, even though it's not cool. to sit at the front of the class. I sat at the very front of the class so I could hear everything, so I could see everything on the blackboards or the transparencies, if people use that anymore, and so I wouldn't be distracted by people's butts. But yeah, chat. This was an interesting experiment. I think it was a success. I'll tighten up the things that I need to tighten up in terms of getting the production value, so it's nice and watchable after the fact. But I think this was good. I'm glad that we were able to hook up with the Planetary Society, and going forward, we are going to be working with the Planetary Society again in just a couple of weeks, where they may or may not be featured on a big platform for gamers. Anyway, chat, I was nervous about this, but I think this turned out well. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know if you did enjoy it. For all of you who want to join this conversation after we're live, or if you want to talk with me, or you want to get episodes early, you want private live streams, you want to see my feet, that's patreon.com/Kyle Hill. So many members, so many professors inside of our private Discord. Why not do a Discord call instead of Zoom? Because I didn't think about it. But it was fine. That was fine. I think that was fine. Discord would be better. Yeah, no, I know. But we'll take our little wrenches. Yes, we'll take our little wrenches and we'll do that. Okay. We'll do it. We'll do that. Or Skype. Is Skype still around? Isn't Skype dead? I don't know. I don't care. Anyway, chat. Patreon.com/Kyle Hill if you want even more of everything to support our nerdy mission to explore and explain everything underneath the stars and beyond. Chat. No matter where I see you next time, whether it's on the private Discord in just a few moments, whether it's on the Patreon for behind the scenes stuff, whether it's the next live stream, interview, next gaming stream, in the comments of the next main video, in the next Half-Life histories, in the next whatever we're doing. I hope until then you have a wonderful rest of your day, and for however long you are conscious on this planet. Remember, the situation right now, situations like we talked about today, it's getting a little rough out there. But I think as long as we can try to stay civil and nice to each other, we maybe, just maybe, can get through it, chat. So that being said, be nice to each other, because this is all we got. I'll see you soon.